Recorded live.
Welcome to the Continuous Delivery Podcast by CA Technologies. My name is Faraz Syed, and I'll be your host for this episode. Today, I would like to welcome Alex Martins on the podcast. Alex is responsible for leading continuous testing and quality capability for North America at CA Technologies. In our previous episode with Shamim Ahmed, we talked about continuous delivery and various capabilities that are part of continuous delivery software engineering approach. One of these capabilities was around focusing on quality across the software development lifecycle. When we talk about quality, it's not limited to testing, but ensuring quality across the board, from requirements to code to environment, and yes, it includes testing as well. So let's talk to Alex about this topic. Alex, it's great to have you on the podcast. As I mentioned earlier, on the last episode, Shamim and I briefly touched on this topic of continuous testing and quality. So let me start by asking a question. What is the biggest challenge and role of QA organization, in your opinion, especially when enterprise organizations are embarking on their continuous delivery journey? Does quality and testing take a new meaning in that aspect?
Hi, Faraz. Great to be here. And absolutely, this is actually one of the main challenges that QA organizations are facing today is really what is my role as a QA team in this transformation journey towards continuous everything. And I was just talking last week or 2 weeks ago actually with a hospitality company, and they were really talking to us about how their development teams and operations teams are, having these conversations about environments and infrastructure and tools. And obviously, that particular QA organization is new to that world. They've never been part of those conversations. So when talking to us, they were looking for guidance on how they can really adapt and how they can learn more about that space. And what should they do really in order to earn that seat on the table that now they have been given. So it's really about learning more, learning new skills, so that they can talk more intelligently with developers, with operations teams, and even BAs, right? Because now everything is becoming more continuous, and testing or QA is really in the middle of everything, and they don't want to be the ones that are slowing everything down. So as part of that conversation and a few others we've been having with different companies, the QA organization is really trying to upskill themselves and be ready for that faster world, and also making sure that not only they have the right skills, but that they are the actual enablers for the successful acceleration of the pipeline. So that is really a very hard challenge to tackle today, but luckily that particular team is kind of starting off on the right foot.
Yeah, we often talk about quality and testing, right? Traditionally, if you look at a testing organization, really it was in the center of development and operations. Now, in past couple of years, we've been talking about agile methodologies around software development. We've been talking about continuous delivery. So you have this shift left concept, right, where everything kind of shifts left. QA organizations, in my mind, have shifted left, but I also kind of see them when it comes to continuous delivery, the shift left and the shift right. So, how, in your opinion, how is quality really assessed in that context of continuous delivery?
Right, and that's an interesting topic as well, because as you are getting into more of a continuous delivery, type of world, and you're shifting left, you are in fact doing more testing, right? As one of the quality-related activities, you're doing more testing up front. So starting even in the requirements phase, as you are preventing defects from ever getting into the code, as you remove ambiguities from requirements, and as you have the developers, develop the code, that code will be inherently, better with less problems. And in addition to that, the developers are also, doing a lot of test-driven development these days in order to accelerate their development, process too. So when the code gets to, for example, a QA environment where a traditional QA organization usually gets involved, it is expected that the defect rate will not be that high or will not be as high as traditionally it has been. So, does that mean that, quality is great or is not great because we're finding less defects? The metrics that you're really that you have been using as a QA team for the past years are not entirely applicable in today's continuous delivery world. You have to think beyond that traditional, way of thinking. And so things like, have we been able to find more defects either by the developer or prevent defects from a BA, a business analyst perspective? Have we been able to prevent those problems from getting to the code? Those are metrics that today we have to start capturing so that we can assess the overall quality of the entire application and not just the overall quality of whatever, the QA team touches on. Similarly, as you shift to the right, like you were saying, the testing activity or the testing responsibility from a quality organization perspective doesn't end when you finish your testing in the QA and pre-production environment. You have to also think about how do you measure the customer experience in production, right? Usually that type of role or that type of activity has not been part of the QA organization's roles and responsibilities. But we're seeing that today the customer experience is really sometimes even more important than whatever testing has been taking place in the pre-production environment. So we're seeing a lot of movement from the QA organizations to get more engaged in production through application performance monitoring solutions so that they can learn, for example, how is the user journeys taking place in the actual application from a real user point of view, and taking those learnings and applying those learnings into the QA artifact so that in the next release, in the next sprint, the QA activities can be further enhanced and if possible automated as much as possible. So that's one of the things that we're seeing from a shift left and right perspective.
That's great because, I want to kind of shift left in our conversation and talk about that, and we'll shift right. So one of the things you mentioned was around test-driven development, right? It's a concept that I'm seeing that our customers are adopting. I'm also seeing that in traditional quality testing or testing, QA, you have requirements and you have test cases. And a lot of times these requirements and test cases don't match over a period of time, and they take their own life of their own, so to speak. In test-driven development, you actually try to solve that problem. So from your perspective, what's your opinion around that? I mean, how do you really optimize your requirements and test cases from the point of view of test-driven development and just generally from continuous delivery perspective?
Right. So we're seeing a lot of activities around making or having requirements described in a better way, right, from a shift left standpoint. And as that takes place, a lot of organizations are, going agile, going down that journey as well. So if we're really talking about user stories, similar thing. How can we make sure that we have the user stories described at the right level so that developers can develop and the testers can test? So if we approach it from that angle, the developer will take, for example, the acceptance criteria of a user story and will start, writing the test so that they, that acceptance criteria can be met. Once that test is written, that's when they will start writing the code so that that particular criteria is actually met. Once that code is run, and then if you go more towards the QA organization, that's when they'll do more of an acceptance test-driven development, which is really taking the different pieces of code from the developer and based on the user story, they will start writing those acceptance test cases in the QA environment, and they'll once that code from the developer is deployed to the QA environment, they'll be running those tests. So from that perspective, you have a one-to-one match, so to speak, in different levels, at the QA level as well as from a developer's level, where you're not, you're preventing that discrepancy you talked about, where in the traditional world, as a tester, I would read the requirement or the user story, and I would, based on my interpretation, start designing different types of test cases. And obviously, experience is really what usually counts the most in those cases. So the more experienced the tester was, the more different techniques that tester knew, the more test cases would be created. So by kind of leveraging, test-driven development at the developer level and acceptance test-driven development, or ATDD, at the tester level, you're kind of addressing that, in a more direct way, and making your testing process, a little better or more efficient.
Yeah, that's good to know. I mean, we also hear about continuous everything concept, right? I mean, I was talking to Shamim about this in a previous podcast, and we touched on continuous testing. What does really continuous testing really mean? What's the purpose behind it? What's the process? And what's the practice of continuous testing?
Right. Yeah, continuous testing, I mean, in continuous delivery, as you go through that journey, continuous testing is definitely a very key element in there. And it's really about the practice of thinking about testing, across the different teams and environments. So for example, if we are in development, we are doing the obviously, if we're using the TDD technique, or the test-driven development, like we said, that is inherently, doing testing in development, without being seen as an extra activity. But also, if we think in development, if we are creating, or if we are, building our CI or continuous integration mechanisms, right? We are going to have triggers to provision environments automatically. We are going to create triggers to, start code quality scans, code security scans. All of those triggers, all of those rules also have to be tested, right? Because as the code of the application is evolving over time, you have to update those triggers. You have to update the environment configuration. Maybe now that code requires a different version of a JVM so that it can run. Maybe it requires an additional, web server or app server. So all of those things that happen also from an infrastructure perspective have to be tested by someone. It doesn't matter who that person is. If that person, usually today, for the most part, it's the developer's responsibility, and they do that without thinking about it too much. But over time, as we have been working with different companies, we're seeing a lot of those responsibilities also kind of being taken over by more skilled, testers, which is part of the evolution of their role. And then if you go to QA, right, it's continuous testing is really about doing all of those environment level activities we were just talking about, but really thinking about full test automation at the code level. And then you're talking about having your smoke test suites, you're talking about having your regression testing suites, but also thinking about doing test automation within the sprint, and not just thinking about automating your test after the completion of that sprint, after the code is stable, because that used to be a requirement, right, for you to start doing functional test automation, or even performance for that matter. The premise is that you have to have the application code stable. So that has changed in the continuous delivery world. The tools today are much better at supporting parallel scripting for the test automation scripts, as well as the performance. So and then if you go to pre-production and even production, with monitoring, you are in fact doing testing in production by monitoring certain user journeys, by doing synthetic monitoring on certain scenarios, so that you can understand how your application is behaving, how the users are using your application, and bringing that knowledge back into the next sprint for you to actually apply updates to the application. So if you think about all of those different levels of testing across the entire continuous delivery pipeline, that's really what it means. It's that we are always testing. Everybody's responsible for doing testing in their own world, and the ultimate outcome is really a better product.
It's amazing how far we have come. I mean, you know that you and I both come from a testing background, and I remember 15 years ago as a performance testing engineer, performance testing used to be the last thing you do before you go into production, and it was kind of unthinkable at that point where you could do performance testing in development, as you kind of talked about. And oftentimes, I even had customers where we tried performance testing a application, and we made a decision we got to go in production, with 2 weeks of performance testing. Looks like all that has changed. That's kind of completely shifted. And the tester's role seems to be very complex. So in your mind, what is the new age quality assurance tester? What are the skill set? What do they look like in this world of continuous delivery?
Right. That's a great point. And what I can say is in working on the space, like you said, for many years, and really helping different companies more recently as they go through that transformation, we're seeing a major shift in the testers' skills, right? The required skills. So they're having to learn a lot more about how developers actually develop their code. What do they need so that they can integrate their code into the main branch, and then what happens right after that code is integrated? How does it get built and deployed and so on? Similarly, we're also seeing a lot of testers focusing more and more on the user on the user behavior. So we're kind of seeing this kind of branch in the tester role. So some of them are focusing on specializing on the user side of things, really understanding the user journeys, the user expectations, and so on. And some testers are focusing more on expanding their technical skills, and so that they can work more closely with the developers and the operations teams, and so that they can actually help the entire organization build the enablers for getting to a continuous everything state. So as an example, the tester, we're seeing a lot of testers now helping developers with code scan setup, right? So they're trying to understand what does it take to write quality code? What are the different parameters that should be configured in a quality code scan process, and so on. And then they become responsible for setting those up so that when the developer is about to check in their code, those scans run, and the developer doesn't have to worry about did I set the parameters right? Did I do this right? So it's more seamless to the developer. So the tester is not just doing their regular testing or test automation as they are expected to do, but they're actually enabling the developers to do a better job, a more efficient job, and really focusing on writing code, writing quality code, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, I also wonder if the testers now are even moving further left and working with the business analyst and defining those requirements, and defining those test cases. So what's your opinion on that topic?
Yeah, that's a major improvement that we are seeing, today, because we've always, as testing practitioners, we've always asked to be involved early on, right, in the projects. We've always used to say, hey, Mr. Project Manager, as you are, starting up the project, kicking off the project, please, just let us get in the room and listen in. I mean, we're going to be, better prepared to help the entire team. That in many cases, for the most part, never happened. Testing was always kind of involved later on. But today what we're seeing is, since we are all talking about building quality into the application and not just testing for quality, we're seeing the doors have opened for not only the tester but the operations team to also be more involved in the requirements gathering phase and backlog grooming activities and so on. So many testers are working much closer to the business analysts, the product owners, and as those stakeholders write those requirements, the testers are being able to provide inputs so that those requirements are more clear. All the ambiguities are removed, or for the most part, they are cleaner. And in that way, the developers will write better code, the testers will write better tests, and so on. So and there are many techniques, many solutions that have just emerged recently that enable the testers to play a huge role in that initial phase of the life cycle by modeling the requirements in a way that you can automatically generate a lot of the downstream artifacts that are used in testing.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about model-based testing, and I think we need a whole episode just to talk about that. But from a high level, I mean, what does model-based testing mean, just as an overview?
Okay, very quickly, model-based testing means modeling the requirements or user stories in such a way where from that model, you are able to add different layers, such as the test data layer to that model, such as the interfaces or the APIs, also the automation, the test automation layer. So you can imagine this model of a requirement, which is essentially a visual workflow or an active workflow. And then on top of that workflow, you have these different layers that tie everything together. So with that model, which is basically the requirement in a visual format, you have many solutions that allow you to generate the test data either by looking for test data in a repository, bringing it down to a test data mart, or by actually generating synthetic data. But the data will be provisioned. The data will be made available to the testers, and then you will generate automatically the manual test cases, for organizations that still need the test case. Those test cases will be matched to the test data that they need so that they can be executed. Also, the APIs will be provisioned if they exist. If they do not exist, they will be virtualized. The virtual instance of that API will be provisioned so that the test can be run. And ultimately, the automated test, the automated scripts in Selenium, UFT, whatever language that particular team may be using, all of those scripts will be automatically generated from that model. So model-based testing is really about focusing on building the visual representation of a requirement and automatically generating all of those different artifacts we talked about. So data, interfaces, and automated scripts. And so now if you think that you're doing for the first time, that's great. But think about longer term, right? Everybody's moving to Agile. You're doing this multiple times. There's always changes to those requirements. In the traditional world, you would have to go back to your test cases, manual or automated, and manually, create them again or manually update them again after you identify the impact. Now, if you think about model-based testing, if you have that model, once you update the model to reflect the new requirement, all of those artifacts are automatically generated. So it's huge time savings. It's really helping organizations truly achieve the continuous delivery acceleration that everybody's looking for, and really take it to the next level.
Yeah, and one of the other, I think, benefits of this is that when you do change a requirement or a test case, then all the artifacts are updated automatically up and down the stream. Is that correct as well?
That's exactly correct. That's the biggest benefit is really in the change impact analysis, or the automated change impact analysis, I should say. And it's really something we've always envisioned, right? I remember back in 2009 trying to implement, model-based testing, but the technology at the time was really subpar. well, it was not subpar. It was really good, but it required, rocket scientists to make it work. And obviously that was too much. But, today, I mean, we do have, the same level of technology, but we have abstracted all of that complexity. So it's much easier to do that. And, the regular testers in the organization today, are more than capable to achieve that acceleration through model-based testing.
Yeah, and as we all know, we have a product called Agile Requirement Designer, which actually allows you to do that. The other aspect that I've heard you talk to over customers, Alex, especially around the Agile Requirement Designer, is optimizing test cases to get better testing coverage. Can you talk a little bit about the test coverage challenges that you see, with the customers you talk to?
Yes, absolutely. So, many traditional testing organizations, you find those, thousands of test cases that are just laying around in a, test management tool. And for the most part, those test cases have not been updated over time, right? As the applications have gone through different releases and major changes, and also the testing team has changed, right? Maybe the company has switched vendors or just had some, attrition. So a lot of those test cases in that repository become outdated. So one of the things, Agile Requirements Designer, helps us do is really optimize that test case repository by actually, identifying the test cases that are duplicates. You have many, because different teams are building test cases sometimes for the same functionality. So there are many duplication, or there's a lot of duplication, there's a lot of outdated tests. So as you bring those tests into the solution and you optimize them, you can send them back to the test management tool in a much better shape. So you're essentially not only making the test case better, you are reducing the number of tests, right, because you are removing things that are not necessary anymore, but you're also measuring the coverage, the testing coverage that you are in fact achieving today. And you're mathematically doing that because it's all calculated by a series of algorithms in the tool. And again, it goes back to the model-based testing conversation we're having, right? So as you have these visual models with these different possible paths, you know precisely what you are testing and what you are not testing. Do you have a test for this path or not? So based on those characteristics, you're able to say, I'm covering, for example, 72% or 13% of my requirement. Is that something acceptable? Or if not, then you can basically increase the testing coverage by adding different tests into your repository. And that's how that solution helps us really make sure that we have the appropriate test coverage as we move forward after we have optimized that repository.
Awesome. I think, Alex, you and I can have probably multiple episodes talking about model-based testing and test case optimizing test cases. By the way, I hear that you have a blog on D-Zone, and as of this morning, I think we had around 10,000 views on that blog, so congratulations on that. Would you like to share your Twitter handle on the podcast?
Sure thing. I mean, if anybody listening to us wants to get in touch and just have a conversation about quality in general, I mean, that's really my passion. You can just find me on Twitter and also LinkedIn by Alex Martins IT. Everything together, Alex Martins IT, and let's start talking.
Great. Alex, thank you. I'm excited and look forward to having more discussion with you. Folks, the podcast is available on iTunes Store. You can search for Continuous Delivery 101 Podcast by SIA Technologies, and you will find this podcast. My Twitter handle is @FuzzSyed, FuzzSyed, Fuzz Syed. Stay tuned for the next podcast. Thank you.